What is up, guys? It's Mr. Galworth here. You can call me Mr. G, and today we'll be looking at the effects of World War I. Now, up to this point, we've looked at the main causes of World War I, we've looked at the major players of World War I, we've looked at the outcomes of World War I, being the Allies win, and so today we're going to focus on how war has changed due to this war. So if we think about like previous wars we've been looking at, the American Revolution, French Revolution, English Civil War, we see that fighting has become, or was at that point, really personal. Like, I can see my opponent 30, 40, 50 yards if we're talking about French Revolution or American Revolution. If we're talking about English Civil War, we're fighting primarily hand-to-hand. Now this war is going to be very different because it almost looks like what we see today with, if you look at the wars in the Middle East, when we talk about Vietnam and Korea, in the sense that we have what we call mechanized war. Now, mechanization is an important term for World War I. When we look at mechanization, it means things done by machinery. So it's taking almost the human element out of it, and we're using machines now to do the fighting for us. So when we look at these machines, they're being mass produced. And we've talked about mass production before with the Industrial Revolution. Mass quantities of identical products. So we're going to see that factories are able to produce really quickly different styles of weapons, guns, the ammunition, those are shells, bombs that are being dropped from planes, and we'll look at Zeppelins today. But one of the primary big game changers of World War I is definitely the invention and the implementation of the machine gun. So within World War I, we're going to have a series of new weapons here. We're going to spend a lot of time in class focusing on these, the machine guns, use of poison gases, we'll talk about mustard, phosphate gases, airplanes, we'll look at that today, submarines, artillery guns, that's like in the top left corner there, the big cannons shoot far away, tanks, and then flamethrowers. Flamethrowers we'll look at on tomorrow, and you'll see that they are going to be a very devastating, very scary weapon, but also for the users a very scary weapon as well. Now, with all these new weapons, we have to remember that this has an impact on the way wars are fought. And so when we look at World War I, we're going to look at the human cost. So when we talked about like the French Revolution, we looked at close to 50,000 people losing their lives. When we looked at the English Civil War, we looked at approximately 20,000 people in the fight losing their lives. With World War I, we're looking at an estimated. Now, you're never quite sure of true numbers during these time periods. Once, because just the fact that records weren't as highly kept as we do now, but two, the fighting is such a long distance apart, it's hard to account for everything. But when we do these types of estimates, we kind of, for my class, you guys know, we usually pick like the middle area. So about 30 million soldiers and civilians were killed. Civilians being, once again, those that are not intended to be a casualty of the war. These are people in cities or the outskirts of cities, but they just can't escape the fighting. So nearly 13 million of these casualties are going to be civilians, which is very different too than previous wars, because if I was a person in the area of fighting, I could typically have escaped, but with these far-reaching weapons, there's a lot of times where they just don't have time to flee. So we're going to focus on a couple of these weapons today. We're going to focus on the machine gun, and then we're going to jump into battles in the air. Just as a cool little preview, because these are big changes here that occur and that still have an impact on the world today when we talk about wars. So let's first jump into machine guns. So we've talked about machine guns before in class. These weapons were designed for mass quantities of bullets going down the field with really little human interaction, besides the fact that you have to have someone who is pulling the trigger or pushing down the trigger in these cases. When we looked at the machine gun in class, we focused on this guy right here. It's kind of ironic because the Germans, which will become kind of known for the use of the machine gun, and this one's called the Maxim machine gun, they were world renowned for this machine gun during this time period, but it wasn't actually their idea. The idea of the machine gun actually came from the British, but inventors and these guys that are kind of in charge of what fighting should look like, the rules or the conduct of fighting, they thought this weapon was considered ungentlemanlike because it didn't require many skills. It was just point the barrel down and hold down the trigger, and just keep shooting, shooting, shooting. Now, I guess what we look at with the machine gun, though, is war itself is changing at this time. We are taking the human element out of it. So one of the benefits of the machine gun are obviously the idea that you can shoot, or what we call spray, bullets downfield, roughly 300 rounds a minute, versus a standard rifle at that time where you could get maybe 3, 4, 5 shots off in a minute, depending on how efficient you were. The drawback to the machine gun is the fact that with this weapon, one, it's extremely heavy. It's not like it's our guns, say, where you can like walk with them, shoot them at the same time, and still have the same impact. These weapons were pretty much a static weapon. It stayed in one place. And then if you notice too in this image here, you typically had 4 to 5 men to actually use these guns. You'd have one guy who was just a trigger guy. You'd have 2 guys on each side of them, making sure that the belt that the bullets are on go through, that they don't get jammed. And if you imagine, like, I'm looking down the barrel and I'm pointing this barrel down and I'm aiming it, I get kind of tunnel vision. So the guy in the back is typically the observer, and his sole job is to kind of get a general view of the battlefield. So if I'm holding the trigger down, my observer may say swivel left, meaning I need to turn my barrel left because there's new enemies, and then I'm tunnel vision in that area. And he may say turn right, and then I have to turn right as well. So he's kind of the officer. He's the one who's watching everything. So the benefits, once again, a lot of bullets going down in one place. The drawbacks, it's kind of you're there, you are there, you're stuck there, you can't just pick it up and keep firing. And it did take some people out of the fight, because now you have a handful of people dedicated to one weapon versus being able to use different types of weapons. Now, this is going to transform land battle altogether. And when we talked about trenches, this is really why that developed. You had to keep your head down. But war today is not just fought on land. A lot of the wars that we fight, and actually the U.S., that's one of our strengths, is our air power. So aircraft are going to really transform during this time. So when you think of fighting today in the air, you think of primarily airplanes. Now their airplanes are a little bit different, early technology. These are cool images, and you'll see they have open cockpits. You'll see that they have rotors in the front. Those are the little things that spin. These are called biplanes. Now there are triplanes as well. It means they have 3 sets of wings, but these are going to be the basic aircraft of the time. And it's really interesting, because when you talk about, like, I'm in an airplane and I see an enemy in an airplane, the original fighting was literally me pulling out a pistol and shooting at the other plane while I'm still flying the plane. And you see in the right hand picture there, it's if you didn't know what to look for, you may not see it, but right behind that wing there's actually a machine gun. And so you would have someone in the front flying, and then you'd have a machine gunner in the back, and his job was to defend against other airplanes. So we see that planes are being used to fight against other airplanes, but then also there's a good chance that these pilots would also have like grenade looking bombs. And so they would look over the side of their plane, try to figure out where the enemy is, and just drop stuff. And then you keep on flying. Now early planes, they don't fly as fast as they do today, just technology. They also too have a short range, just due to the fact that they require fuel. And so a plane typically this day could be in the air for maybe 30 to 50 minutes. At the land, refuel, come back. So a lot of people are like, these are awesome, they're kind of untouchable by the land, but we want something that can stay in the sky. We want something that can be kind of like that observation post. And so during this time, even before World War I starts, they're going to see the invention of this guy right here on the bottom right. Now today, we would kind of associate them with blimps. These are called zeppelins. And zeppelins are gas-filled balloons. Lightweight gas that's intended just to primarily float. Once again, we have what's called blimps. We use blimps today. The big difference between the one on the left and the right is that if I was to take all that gas out of that blimp on the left, it would kind of deflate like a balloon. A zeppelin has a full metal frame around it. So even if I removed all of the gases from the inside of that structure, the frame would still stay intact, so it would kind of look like it's still inflated. But zeppelins were designed to stay in the air longer, They could transport people. They could be used to drop bombs on cities or military posts. The drawback to the Zeppelin is definitely the plane. Because you think, I mean, I'm in a Zeppelin, so I'm in a hydrogen or a easily flammable gas. And I'm floating in the air. Once something goes wrong, what happens to the Zeppelin? So the Zeppelins were eventually phased out just due to the easy target by things like planes and even ground artillery. They could also shoot down the Zeppelins as well. So when we talk about World War I, it's not just land that's going to be changed in the way we fight, but also the skies. We're going to see that with the invention of these new warcraft, or what we call, things that are in war to fight. We will see them transition and change into World War II, and then into the Cold War, where any technology that you know of today, think of like cell phones today, they didn't start off like they did today, where they could do pretty much anything. They started off kind of basic, and then we build on those. Now with all these new weapons, once again, we have to remember, there's a cost to it. There's a technology cost, research cost, but there's also that human cost, because ultimately we're making fighting more efficient. We're making killing more efficient. And so with all these new weapons, you are going to see an increase in the death toll. So World War I, massive amounts of people, 30 million. When we talk about World War II, there's going to be more deaths, just because now we have built upon these things like planes. Now before I go, remember, you guys still have this article in classroom. We're looking more closely at the weapons. So there's a reading section, there'll be a note-taking section, but I really want you to pay attention to all these different little pros and cons for each of them, because that's ultimately what I want you guys to be able to gain. That yes, with weapons there are advantages, but there are also disadvantages, and how did fighting change because of it. I'll look forward to seeing you guys in class. Peace.